I am a subscriber to Steve's email list, and I can say he's super helpful about giving everything from long-lasting, profound insights, substantive insights into the LSAT, and then just quick pointers. So I'll leave it there and open things up to your conversation. And then if I don't know how you want to handle questions, but I'll let you handle questions as you see fit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Professor Peabody. Hey, everybody. Great to be joining you here from Brooklyn all the way over to New Jersey, where you all are at. So thanks for coming out for this event. We're going to cover a lot of different things today. We'll cover last-minute LSAT prep for anyone taking the March LSAT tomorrow, or whether you're taking in June or July or beyond. This will be applicable for you as well in the final lead up to the exam. I'll also cover prepping for the June and July LSATs specifically if your timeline is 2 to 3 months, or if you're taking it in the fall, I'll cover longer timelines as well. And finally, I'll cover some of the changes related to the LSAT going digital later this summer and the fall, and what that means for you in terms of how you might want to change your prep. I'll also go over some of the other recent changes with the LSAT and LSAC. And then I'll cover logic games if we have time, and if anyone's interested in that. And feel free to interrupt and ask questions throughout. You don't need to hold them till the end. I'm happy to entertain them as you think of them. I wouldn't want you to forget something. I'll still be able to regain my flow. So just if I could get a show of hands, is anyone registered for an LSAT test date coming up? When are you taking it?
June.
June. All right, awesome. So funny thing about June is that June's actually the last time the LSAT will be paper and pencil for everybody. July is when some of these changes start. So for most of you listening, if you're taking the LSAT July or beyond, then I want you to pay special attention when I talk about the digital LSAT stuff later. But just a quick rundown of some last minute LSAT stuff. I know that you guys aren't taking March, but something to keep in mind for anyone who might be taking the LSAT in the near future. I want you, when it comes to the LSAT, a big problem students typically face is stress and anxiety, nerves, given that the LSAT, of course, is a very important exam. It's actually the #1 factor in the law school admission process, so it's natural that it would lead to some anxiety, especially when you're going out and doing the real thing on your official LSAT test date. But the thing I want you to keep in mind is that while the LSAT as a whole is extremely important, no one particular test date is particularly important. Retaking the LSAT is more common than ever before, and it's okay to take it multiple times because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest. So if you're taking in June or July or September, it's all good, even if it doesn't go your way, because you can take it again in October or November or January. The LSAT's being offered more frequently than ever before. It used to be only 4 times a year. Now it's as many as 9 or 10 times a year. So there's always another test date around the corner, just 1 or 2 months away. While you're taking the exam itself, a lot of times stress or anxiety could lead you to get bogged down in a particular question and lose the self-control or foresight to move on. And so I don't want you to ever get bogged down on a single question. Every question's worth the same. If one particular question is giving you an inordinate degree of trouble, don't worry about it. Just flag it, skip it, hope to come back to it later. The new digital format actually really makes it easy to flag questions and see at a bird's eye view what you want to return to. So just know that you will be able to go back to those questions quickly when you're ready to do that. So that's some stress and anxiety related stuff. I also want you to think about avoiding some of these silly mistakes that could derail your score even if everything else was going right. So first off is getting accepted into the test center, getting admitted. You bring your admission ticket, you have your photo, but a lot of times students won't bring a government ID. They might only bring their university ID, which LSAC doesn't consider to be a sufficient level of security. So bring your government ID and make sure that your government ID matches the name on your LSAC admission ticket. If there's a typo, that could be a problem potentially depending on how strict the proctors are. And let's say you got married and changed your last name, that could be something that raises a red flag with the proctors. And of course, it's absurd when you see that clearly your photo is the same and it's only a small difference, but rules are rules, they're legalistic in nature. And so just double check all of that in the final week. When it comes to timing, of course, the LSAT is strictly timed. So I want you to not wait until the end to bubble. If you're taking, for those of you taking the June LSAT, you're still doing it on paper. July, you might do it on paper as well. And so you don't want to wait until the 5-minute warning to bubble. Sometimes proctors forget to give the 5-minute warning, or maybe you forget to actually bubble until the very end. And of course, you want to have something in those grids on the Scantron. Otherwise, you could have solved everything correctly, but LSAC won't know. When you arrive at the test center, I don't want you to pay too much attention to other people in the room or in the lobby. Whatever they say could potentially set you off in some way if they brag about how little they studied and how well they're doing and it's not as better than you are, that might make you feel bad. And so I would say, for the most part, try to avoid other people because you never know what they're going to say. And then on the exam itself, don't try out something new on LSAT test day. A lot of times people will be trying one strategy and then that's not working for them, so they'll decide to totally change their approach. And that's fine if you're doing that a week or two out, but on the day of the exam itself, you don't want that to be the first time that you try out something new, because then if it doesn't work for you, of course, the stakes are fairly high. So that's a lot about stress reduction, silly mistakes. One other thing I want to cover before I wrap up this portion of what I'm talking about here is you want to properly simulate test day conditions while you're taking your time to practice tests. So in the final weeks before the exam, even the final month before, let's say you're doing a timed exam or 2 per week, you want to make sure that those timed exams are 5 sections, not 4. On test day, LSAC will include an experimental section, and you want that experimental section to be valued as highly as the real thing, of course. So maybe let's say you do exams 83, 84, and 85, and 86 in the last 4 weeks before the exam. You could splice in a section from exam 82 into each one of those later 4, and then later tally your results for 82. But of course, doing a 5-section timed exam is much harder than doing a 4-section exam. There's a level of endurance there. You also want to make sure you're timing yourself strictly at the 35-minute mark, and that you're not scoring yourself after each section and checking your results. It's very tempting to do. I used to do that also because you want that instant feedback, but on test day, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to have that break. So I really just want you to make sure that you're doing it as realistically as possible. For those who don't do it realistically, they typically experience a test day score drop, and I want you to make sure that you avoid that, because of course it can be discouraging if your result on the actual test day doesn't match up with what you expected. So the final week of the exam, Thursday should ideally be the last time you do a full-length timed exam as practice. Friday, the day before the LSAT, I just want you to rest altogether, take a hot bath, go for a walk, read a book, binge watch Netflix, whatever. But you want to be fresh and ready to go Saturday morning and walk into the exam and kill it. So that's my quick rundown of some last-minute LSAT stuff to be thinking about in the final week and even the final month. I'll jump into the next portion, which is about what to do for those of you going for June, July, and beyond. Let's say you have a 2-month timeline, a 3-month timeline, or longer. There's typically 3 phases of studying I would recommend. There's accuracy, which is working untimed, then pacing, which is doing individual timed sections, and then finally endurance with full-length 5-section exams. And you don't want to jump ahead of yourself on this. A lot of times students will do a timed diagnostic cold without any studying, and they'll typically do pretty poorly. You know, I certainly did. I started off in the low 150s, and that's not where I expected to start off, because I thought I was good at tests and good at academics and such, but the LSAT was way more than I ever expected it to be. It ended up being much more like learning a foreign language than like something you could cram for, especially if you're coming from more of a humanities or pre-law background. So give yourself the time to learn the material first, untimed, just focusing on accuracy, however long it takes. And you want to work systematically. One of the biggest things I focused on over my time as an LSAT coach is crafting LSAT study plans, specifically week-by-week study plans and then day-by-day study plans. And the day-by-day study plans ended up being one of my most popular LSAT study materials because they lay out exactly what to do specifically every single day over the course of your prep, whether you're going for a 1-month timeline, which I definitely wouldn't recommend, to a 2 to 3 month timeline or beyond. Most people typically study over a 2 to 3 month period, and that's how a lot of traditional in-person prep classes are structured. But I don't really recommend it. It's not really typically enough for students to reach their fullest potential. It ended up taking me over a year to go from the low 150s to a 175 on test day. And I'm not saying that it should take you that long. I definitely wouldn't recommend it. But I also didn't study smart. And I'm hoping that if you follow my study plans, you'll avoid making the same mistakes that I did. So I typically recommend students study for a period of 5 to 6 months total in order to reach their fullest potential. But whatever your timeline is, I've got study plans for you. The week by week ones are free. The day by day ones are $20 to $25, depending on which ones you get. But ultimately what they do is they break it down into those 3 phases: accuracy, then pacing, then endurance. And specifically within each portion, I tell you which articles to read on my site, which pages to read in a book like LSAT's Super Prep, and then which specific LSAT prep test problems to complete from the books of 10 published by LSAT. And those books of 10 are typically around $20 or so on Amazon, and they're the best study material because they're real LSAT questions. Now, in the study plans, I'll show you how to study systematically within each category. So let's say you want to learn logic games, which is one of the toughest sections of the LSAT at first. I'd recommend doing logic games in a particular order, not just doing them out of the books of exams in chronological order. You could do individual games by type. So do ordering games, then grouping games, then combination games, going from easy to hard, meaning that you're doing the easiest ordering games first, then the moderate difficulty ordering games, then the toughest ordering games, then do the same with grouping, the same with combination, and all the various other types. And then, of course, I lay out the same for the various types of logical reasoning questions and so on. But the biggest thing I want you to avoid doing is simply doing sections of logic games without seeing the patterns within them, because the LSAT really is a lot about pattern recognition. Like I said, you can't memorize this exam. It's about a way of thinking. And if you've just done a couple of sections of games where they're all kind of scrambled around, you're not necessarily going to see the common threads between different types of games. And so I want you to go about it systematically with a plan of attack. And you don't have to use my study plans, of course, but I've laid them out for you, and you can check out the week by week ones for free. And I can send Professor Peabody a link to those if he wants to share it with all of you. Has anyone looked at an actual LSAT prep test? What books have you all been using?
So I have 3 books. They're like, oh my God, I can't think of the author thing right now. But I bought them in a set of 3. Someone recommended them to me. They're about like 200 a piece, but they give you like a breakdown in order of the test. And then I've been doing on the online time test a little bit, and I'm kind of keep working till June from there.
Sweet, perfect. Yeah, so definitely doing time tests is extremely important. There's the free June 2007 LSAT on LSAC's website. If you just Google June 2007 LSAT PDF, you'll find it. And then with the coming digital LSAT, LSAC put another exam online in the digital format, so you can play around with that too. But again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a cold diagnostic to start, because the results will be discouraging, and you might say, well, how will I know what I should work on? And the answer really is, since this is like a foreign language, study everything. You have to learn everything. Everyone has to learn the same foundational material. And so I recommend typically focusing on one particular section at a time. So I recommend games, then reasoning, then reading comprehension. But you could still do a mix of the others. So let's say you're focusing on games, you do a little bit of logical reasoning and reading comprehension to change it up. But then when you move on to logical reasoning, you still stay fresh on games and still do a bit of reading comprehension as well. Then later you move on to full-length timed exams as you lead up to test day. But doing LSAT questions alone isn't enough, whether they're untimed or timed. The real value in studying is finding out what you get wrong and what gives you difficulty and focusing on those. A lot of times students will focus only on what they get wrong. They'll look at the answer key and then kind of look back at the question and say, oh yeah, I get it now, and then move on. But they don't really get it, because just looking at the answer key and confirming what LSAC said isn't enough. You have to be able to articulate it to yourself. And so that's why a study group can be really useful. A tutor can be really useful. But if you don't have access to either of those options, you could just write it out on your own. Either write it in a notebook or write it in a document on your computer or post about it online on a forum. But articulating it and then getting feedback from others is really useful. And so if you're studying and you're let's say you're in the 130s or 140s, you find a friend or someone online who's in the 160s or above, that's enough of a difference where the person in the 160s could help you out because they know a bit more than you do about the LSAT. But also, even the person in the 160s teaching the person with the lower score can learn by teaching as well. It took me a year to get to a 175, but it took me far longer than that before I was able to gain the level of understanding on this exam that I have now. And so it's a process, and teaching shows you different ways to explain a problem so that someone else will get it. and it helps you kind of think out loud as well. And so both parties can benefit from that. And so not only do I want you to review your week, whatever you get wrong, I also want you to review anything that gives you difficulty. So let's say you're scoring in low 160s, let's say, and you're getting maybe 20 questions wrong. There might be another 5 to 10 questions where you guessed and got it right, but it could have just as easily gone the other way the next time around. And so for that reason, you will actually want to study those additional 5 or 10 questions as well on top of the 20 or so you may have gotten wrong. You add them together. That, of course, is a lot of questions to review. And you might say, I don't have time for all that. And my answer for you would then be, do fewer exams, change the ratio of your study time so that it's not 90% exams and 10% review. It should actually be closer to 50% doing exams and 50% doing review. And that might sound like a lot, and it is a lot, and it's grueling, and it's not always fun. It's especially when you're finding the gaps in your understanding, because it's basically pointing out the exact reasons why you're not doing as well as you could be. But better that you do that now than that you do that closer to test day or on test day itself, right? You want to have that progression along the way. Because like I said, the LSAT is a lot about pattern recognition. So if you don't learn from your mistakes, you really will be doomed to make them again. And I'd rather you learn them now so that you don't make them again on any future timed practice tests or, of course, on the real thing now. But at least if you're finding out what you have trouble with now, you can improve now and not walk into test day still having some gaps in your understanding. And so let's say you're doing one exam or two exams and you find that you got a bunch of necessary assumption questions wrong or a bunch of flaw questions wrong. That could just be because those question types show up more often than others. It wouldn't necessarily mean that you have a disproportionate difficulty in understanding those particular question types. So you want to definitely consider the frequency with which certain question types appear. But it's also, I would say, not enough just to review logical reasoning or games by their question type. You also want to think about the reasoning going on in the stimulus, if it's logical reasoning, for example. So it may not be that it was a flaw question. It may instead be that it was testing a certain kind of reasoning like causality or correlation causation or confusing necessary and sufficient conditions or other classic types of logical fallacies. So think about whether when you're reviewing, is your misunderstanding stemming from the question type or from the method of reasoning in the stimulus or from some pattern in the answer choices? And if it was in the answer choices, what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that led you to pick it, and what ultimately made it wrong? And what's discouraging about the right answer choice that pushes you away from it, and what ultimately makes it correct? You want to do that again and again and again so that you can see the particular gaps in your understanding, whether it's about certain types of traps of encouragement luring you towards wrong answer choices or traps of discouragement pushing you away from right answer choices. And of course, you're not falling for every single trap or every single trick, because if you were, you'd be getting everything wrong and maybe getting a 120 or 125. So if presumably you're doing somewhat better than that, and if not, it's okay. But if you are, then you want to see which specific traps you're falling for in the answer choices, or maybe unfamiliar wording for a particular question stem, or maybe it's the stimulus or the argument itself. And that process, it takes time. I definitely recommend keeping some type of running list or journal or document listing the exact prep test number, section number, and question number for everything you've ever gotten wrong or had difficulty with, because you can gain a lot of value by returning to that again and again and again over time. And you might want to attempt those same questions multiple times, 5, 10, 15, 20 times. It's actually not too much, as crazy as that sounds. And you'll see that if you got that question wrong once, you are, of course, more likely to get it wrong in the future than something random. But if you do it, let's say, 3 times or 6 times, you can see, did you get it right all 3 to 6 times? Or maybe you got it right the first 3 times, got it wrong the 4th time, got it right the 5th, but then got it wrong again the 6th. And so that suggests that maybe you haven't learned everything you need to know about that particular question, and it's worth, of course, reviewing it again. So definitely just some food for thought there. Has anyone have any questions on anything I said about related to that? Yes, question?
I was going to ask, so where do you recommend starting? Because I'm a sophomore right now, and I'm really looking into, prep and everything. So like, do you recommend a certain, like, so I don't know, because I was thinking I could, attack it in a way where I would do a real test from one and then see myself there and then work on my issues from there. And then you said not to do that, so I'm not sure where to start.
Well, so if I understood your question correctly, it was about being a sophomore and potentially when to take the LSAT and how to start off. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a sophomore in college, that means you're in a great position because you have plenty of time to study for this exam. No rush at all. And like I said earlier, since law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores, you definitely will have many opportunities to take it and reach your fullest potential. Starting off with a cold diagnostic, again, I wouldn't recommend just because it can be discouraging. So I'd say just start your study process. Maybe you can spread it over a longer period of time. So you could study over a 5 to 6 month period and look to take it in September or October or even November this year. And then depending on how you do, consider retaking the following spring or summer. And again, you'll still have plenty of time because you really don't even need to apply to law school until at the earliest the fall of your senior year of college. And that way you can, of course, go directly from undergrad if you want to. But if not, LSAT scores are good for 5 years. So let's say that you took the LSAT in the summer before your senior year, and that was the last time you took it, and that was also when you got your highest score. If that's the case, you then will still have another, let's say 4 years, or even 5 years, of course, where that score is still valid. And so let's say if you do want to work in between undergrad and law school, you'll have some time for where the score is still good before then. Does that address your question? Okay, great, of course. Well, I think overall, like I said, 5 to 6 months is a long time, but people really do underestimate how long this takes. And so if it does end up taking you 3 or 4 or even 5 LSAT attempts, and maybe you cancel one score, maybe you don't, but either way, if it takes you that many tries, that is normal and it's okay. Retaking is more common than ever because the schools don't average multiple scores. And so there's never really a downside to doing it if you think you could do better. And the funny thing about LSAT scores is that although they're valid, they vary. People always talk about fluctuating scores and they'll say, well, what does this mean? Is this a bad thing? And I say it's actually perfectly normal. There's a margin of error of sorts of 3.5 points on either end, meaning that you could get a 157 one day, a 164 the other day, and the LSAT is still considered a valid exam, as funny as that is. So let's say you took it in June this year and you got a 157. You took it in July and kind of just stayed fresh on the LSAT for another 6 weeks, and then you got a 164. You could apply with a 164, and that's what law schools will consider. And of course, that opens far more doors than a 157 would, and gets you a lot more scholarship money as well than a 157 would. And so even if you got a 160, it'd still be worth retaking. The value of a single LSAT point is something like $4,000, and that's just at the start. If you think about how that scales over the course of your entire career, the ROI on that is huge just for taking another 5 or 6 time practice tests once a week over 6 weeks just to stay fresh on it. There's never any easier money you'll make in life than just getting those 2 points more on the LSAT with that minimal investment. So those are some comments on that. If you're studying for the LSAT while you're in college during the semester or during the summer, let's say, you have plenty of time. I would treat it as if it were a 6-credit class in college or like a part-time job, maybe 10, 15, 20 hours a week. And so carve out that time. Maybe you do more on the weekends. Maybe you do more in the evening. Maybe if you're working at an internship or something, you do it before work, during lunch, or after work. You kind of just have to carve out the time wherever you can. Any questions on structuring your studying or study schedules?
Can you, I'm hoping and assuming at some point you'll walk us through some of the different kinds of services and programs you offer, but do you have any perspective on something we could do that would be useful to kind of help students just generally, would it be doing a diagnostic test? I mean, that's the kind of thing that wouldn't be useful for the students to work on with you. Are there things that we should be offering that really aren't the purview of a tutor? So that's question 1. And then question 2 has escaped me, but while you're answering that one, I'll come up with it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. I'm always looking to see how pre-law advisors and others can support students, especially in college. I think that offering proctored timed exams is very useful. And of course, like I said, I wouldn't take the results of those as being indicative of one's aptitude. But I think having that setting where it's closer to what students will actually experience on the actual test day, I think is extraordinarily useful, and opportunities to take those kinds of proctored LSATs are not as common as they could be. There are definitely some smartphone apps and YouTube videos that kind of simulate the experience, but having the physical experience of being in the room with the desks, with someone proctoring it, with the distractions that other test takers can bring if they're tapping their foot or tapping their pencil or sneezing or something like that, replicating those conditions is very useful. And I don't know to what extent you'll be able to do this, but once the LSAT, of course, is going digital later this year, being able to give students the experience of doing it on a tablet in that setting, I think could be really useful, especially for students who don't have their own tablet.
Hi, I just have a question. I'm a junior. I was the one who said I was taking it in June. So that's going to be the first time I take the LSAT, and then I plan to take it again later in the fall of my senior year, right before I apply to law schools. Do you have any recommendations of how to differ? Because I'm going to probably be taking it the last time on the paper, and then I'll probably be taking it electronically. So what would you recommend studying wise, or how would you think the biggest differences would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So if you're taking it in June on paper, of course, then that means that you want to be using physical materials. So you want to have those books of 10 on Amazon published by LSAC with the actual exams. And then you want to be, of course, timing yourself strictly and everything like that. But then once it's going, let's say you're taking the exam again in the fall in September or October, and you're doing it digitally, then you would ideally have some sort of way to access the digital versions of the exam, like the PDFs. So you could do them on your screen, or maybe you have to scan them or something like that. But doing them on the screen and then working with scrap paper on the side is my biggest recommendation for doing it in the digital format. And of course, those are very different experiences. So you're going to want to study, let's say you take it in June, it's June 3rd. You then still have at least 3.5 months or so to start doing it on the screen to adjust to the digital format. So I would say over the course of the summer, try to do at least once a week or so, do a timed exam on the screen with your scrap paper to the side. But of course, everything else, like the timing, will remain the same. And definitely familiarize yourself with the digital format. If you go on LSAC's site, the website is familiar.lsac.org. It's LSAC's online familiarization tool. And so you can kind of interact with some of those digital LSAT features there. And you could do that on a laptop or desktop computer. But of course, the experience that will more closely replicate that is if you can do it on a tablet, ideally, or if not that, a smartphone. LSAC is using the Microsoft Surface Go tablets for the actual official LSAT administrations, but a more affordable option is the Samsung Galaxy tablet. And you can, of course, want to use that with a stylus, which is kind of like a pen for the tablet. So I recommend that. Of course, it's a couple $100. It's not ideal that you have to invest that, but again, the ROI, if it gets you even a single point more on the LSAT, is enormous. And so it's well worth investing in that if you're taking the LSAT digitally.
And in the digital model, do they allow us to scrap on the side if we work on it on the actual daily exams? Are we allowed that?
Yeah, so on the digital LSAT, you will have scrap paper to the side, which is great. There seems to be, you'll have more than enough scrap paper. What you won't be able to do is draw freehand on the tablet itself. You're very limited in how you can interact with the digital LSAT. So you can highlight using their tool, you can underline using their tool, you can enlarge the text if you want, but you're not able to draw notes on the tablet as if it were a piece of paper, which is kind of funny to me because I feel like the whole point of a tablet is that you can draw freehand like you would draw on a piece of paper, but LSAC has their technological limitations, I guess. So that's what you're dealing with. Yeah, question?
So since we're moving to the digital thing, does that mean they're going to give us our scores the second we finish?
That's a great question. Yeah, it would be really nice if they did, but unfortunately, they're still making you wait at least 3 weeks or more to get your scores back. They don't do instant scoring, and I think it's really because they want to do some kind of statistical analysis after the exam is administered to see how people performed on it and compare it to their expectations of how people would do, because they want to make sure that the raw score conversions are what they consider to be valid. And so for that reason, you do have to wait 3 weeks on average for any LSAT score release no matter when you're taking it. And the funny thing for July is that it's actually going to take even longer potentially. On LSAT's site, they're not giving an actual release date right now like they usually do. They're saying that the release date is to be determined. So I think that because of the digital transition, they want to allow themselves extra time if they need it. Now, I should probably talk a little bit about what exactly is happening this summer and the fall. The June LSAT is the last time it's being given on paper and pencil to everybody. The only change there is that the writing sample will now be digital, meaning that you take the LSAT 5 sections on paper in June, then you have up to 1 year to do the writing sample from the comfort of your own home on your own device, and LSAT will monitor you with a webcam and a microphone for test security and validity purposes. They'll have you hold up your government ID to the camera, and so they can kind of verify that it's you doing it. I think they're just doing this, of course, to make sure it's actually you taking it. And you won't be doing that at the exam center. You'll be doing that later on your own. And so at least you can do it when you're a bit more fresh. But since the writing sample is still unscored, law schools will not, they won't be looking at it that closely, as they never really have looked at it that closely. They might look at it if they have concerns over someone's English fluency, but otherwise they don't typically give it much attention. Then going forward to July, LSAT is beginning the full digital transition, meaning that half of test takers will be assigned the digital format. The other half will be assigned the paper and pencil format. LSAT chooses for you, and you don't get any advance notice. So I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be in that situation not knowing what I was going to see. Maybe some of you are more comfortable with the tablet format than I am personally. The case in which I would recommend July is if you're also doing June. So I know one of you is doing June there. So if you're doing June, it's not that much more additional effort to study for another 5 to 6 weeks. And then if you do 3 or 4 points better or more, that's awesome. And if not, no big deal, because again, law schools only consider your highest LSAT score. Now, otherwise, I would recommend typically avoiding July just because of the ambiguity around it going digital and which format you'll get really. I suppose that if you don't care about that, then by all means do it. There is one small benefit to the July LSAT, which is that they will let you see your score before deciding whether to cancel. And that'll be, of course, 3 to 4 weeks later, potentially. But while some people like that idea, it's kind of like a score choice similar to the SAT, I suppose. But since law schools don't average multiple LSAT scores, there's never really a reason to cancel unless something went astronomically horribly wrong. Otherwise, I'd say don't cancel. And so this little benefit of seeing your score first, I think, doesn't really matter that much, or I think you shouldn't consider that heavily. And then going forward to the fall LSATs in September, October, November, and beyond, it'll be 100% totally digital on the tablet. Any questions on any of that about the transition?
I just have a question where it's like, so say I take it in June and then I go to take it again in September, and the September is fully digital. Well, just in general, a lot of schools taking into account that the test is going digital. Will they be taking that into account in the scorings, because it has been on paper for forever? So will they take that account into some people will work have less quality of work and a digital aspect? If that makes any sense.
That's a great question. I totally get what you mean. And my personal expectation is that in July, when they're doing this 50-50 kind of experiment, I do think they'll find that people do better on the paper than on the digital, because I think the digital LSAT format is kind of clunky and has some bugs that should be worked out before they really go big with this. But the plan is, of course, for them to go forward with September no matter what. So I'm not sure what the point of running this experiment is if they're going to still go ahead with it either way. Now, as far as law schools are concerned and admission officers, what will they think? I think they will have some sympathy for those who are doing the digital, given that it is the first time. But there are also the numbers to consider. The numbers do have a certain reality and concreteness to them. And law school admission officers, part of their job really is to make sure their schools remain high in the rankings. And their way to remain high in the rankings is to admit the students with the highest numbers possible, the highest scores, the highest GPAs. And so it is what it is, make the best of it. And so if you need to retake it multiple times to get better and more comfortable with the format, then I think you should go ahead and do that. So let's say maybe you want to do June, July, September, and October, or just June, September, and October, whatever it works for you ultimately with your schedule. But I think that ultimately you just got to get the score. And if you don't get the score that you want, you should retake. It's really just kind of the real world situation that we have. They're not able to give any kind of bumper handicap like for golf, for example. It is what it is, really. So just get the best numbers possible, get yourself a tablet to practice on, and you'll maximize your odds of doing well with the format. And just to be fair to the digital format, it's not all bad. There are some benefits to it. I think one of the biggest benefits is that you can flag questions to come back to later. You can very easily see them. You're not losing time to physically bubbling on a separate Scantron. So maybe that'll save you a little bit of time. On the reading comprehension, if they give a line reference to a particular number or particular vocabulary term, they'll automatically highlight that portion of the reading comprehension passage. So it's very easy to flip back and forth between them. So I think there are some pros and there are some cons, and it will take some getting used to. And so to maximize yourself on that, get a tablet to study with, and then of course, practice as many times as possible, maybe even retake it multiple times. And any tablet will do, really. You could do it on an iPad, you could do it on a Samsung. If your smartphone's one of those crazy big ones, like a Google Pixel, you can use that. And then of course, if you don't have a tablet, maybe you go to your parents and say, oh, it's for LSAT studying, and they'll get you one maybe. Any other questions on the digital format?
So I remember my question. I'll make it quick. I have a non-scientific sense that many students overestimate how well they'll do if they retake the LSAT. Can you offer some perspective on that, especially the students who do make a big jump? What distinguishes those who really do see some value added from one test to the next, and those who don't?
That's a great question, and it's worth asking because LSAT retakes are more common than ever. And if you look at the actual data published by LSAC, the typical student only improves a point or two. And so I think we have to ask the question, why? And ultimately, I think if you want to improve significantly on a retake, you need to think about what you'll do differently this time around going forward to change up your studying. I think a lot of times people underestimate just how much dedication and prep this exam requires. And so if you don't carve out the time in your schedule, you don't make it a priority, then you're not going to get the results. I think people often register for a retake, then the LSAT is kind of always in the background, but on the back burner, but never the top priority. And so for that reason, it kind of just gets to be the week before and they're like, oh yeah, I was registered. I'm going to do another timed exam. But that alone, of course, won't really make any difference. And if anything, if you're rusty from all your previous studying and you didn't stay fresh on it, then that could lead to a drop as well. So I think that it really is about carving out the time. So let's say if you had a busy semester or you were busy doing your internship or partying over the summer and you didn't make it a priority, then yeah, next time around, think about how you will carve out the time. Maybe you want to block off a full day for it, or maybe you want to, if you're using, let's say, Google Calendar or a planner, you have a recurring appointment, a recurring booking where, let's say, every Friday afternoon or every Thursday afternoon, you block off a 3 to 4 hour chunk for nothing but studying. And then Sunday, you do the same thing. Or maybe you take a lighter course load one semester so that you can give the LSAT the attention it deserves of being, let's say, 10, 15 hours a week. A lot of times also students won't be willing to make the investment in prep materials. And it's kind of crazy to me because you could just buy one of these $20 books of LSAT exams. They're called books of actual official LSAT prep tests if you want to search them. One $20 book to get a fresh, clean copy of exams to do and redo. The ROI on that could be huge versus let's say using any old book that your friend gave you or buying a used book that has markings in it. You're wasting your time if you just kind of go through it, erasing everything. It's worth making the investment in yourself on this. So carving out the time, getting the best resources possible, that's what really makes the difference. And like I said, there's also to consider how long your study timeline is. Are you willing to invest 5 to 6 months or more? That's what the people who really do the best on this exam typically invest that amount of time in this exam, and they do more than 10 exams. Maybe you want to get a couple books of 10 exams to do. And it's really, if you think about it, only $30 for, let's say, you're getting, or let's say $60 to get 30 actual released exams. That's more than enough study material, and you could study just with that and free resources online, and that alone would be enough.
I had at least one student ask if you could walk us through some of the different kinds of services and programs you offer. Do you offer what amounts to a mini course? Is it just individualized tutoring? Do you, how much are you able to kind of fine tune your help if somebody comes in and says, I just can't figure out the games. Can we do 3 intensive sessions? Can you kind of walk us through a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. So again, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been coaching the LSAT now for over 10 years. I started back when I was on my own LSAT journey prepping for this. And like I said, I started off really low in the low 150s, where my goal was a top 14 law school, getting a 175. And so soon after I achieved my score, I started helping out with friends to study for the LSAT. And so I started tutoring it as well. And I tutored the SAT and academic subjects in the past. So tutoring came naturally to me. And because the LSAT is a more particularized niche exam than other subjects, I quickly focused on it. And I also loved it. I thought it was a lot more interesting and more complex than any other subject I'd ever encountered up to that point. And so I then started my website, the LSAT blog. It's at lsatblog.blogspot.com. And over the past 10 plus years, I've written over 1,000 LSAT articles covering every aspect of LSAT prep and law school admissions. I mentioned the LSAT schedules. I also have LSAT diaries where students wrote in featuring their stories of their own study journeys. So you could see someone who went from the 140s to the 160s, how they went about it, or someone who went from the 150s to the 170s, and everything in between. You can read all these journals, diaries, journal entries, all these articles, and that's one of the particularly more popular sections of my site. Of course, I have articles and resources covering every aspect of the exam: logic games, logical reasoning, and reading comprehension. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. So if you listen to podcasts, go on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play, just search LSAT Unplugged and you'll find me there. The YouTube channel is at youtube.com/LSATblog. And on there, I have full recordings of classes like this, also in-person classes that I taught in New York. I also have interviews with other LSAT instructors and LSAT admissions folks and current attorneys. Everyone who's related to the legal field, I'll kind of feature them and interview them. I also have on there Facebook Lives and YouTube Lives, and so Q&A sessions and lessons as well. So definitely check that out. As far as more premium resources, I have the day-by-day study plans. They're probably the best jumping off point if you're starting cold with this exam. Beyond that, I have guides, explanations, cheat sheets, checklists as far as written materials are concerned. And then I also have video courses covering every section of the exam: games, reasoning, reading comp. I also have a law school admissions course. I also have test day success course focused on simulating test day conditions and avoiding nerves and anxiety. I do also do one-on-one coaching, primarily online. So even if you're not in New York City or close to it, you can still work with me remotely. I meet with students over Skype and over Zoom or even over the phone. I also do meet with students in person. I regularly hold meetups in New York City at my office in Brooklyn. So you're welcome to come down anytime just to meet up for free, hang out. I'll do free classes there as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love doing this. You can feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to help however I can. You can email me at lsatunplugged@gmail.com or visit the LSAT blog or the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And I also actually have another LSAT podcast that I co-host with a friend of mine, Graham Blake, who's another LSAT instructor. And so we have a lot of fun with it. So plenty of free resources out there. And then of course, if you want more, that's available too.
The day-to-day plans, will we email you about those too, or is it a different way to go about getting those?
Yeah, sure. So if you go on the LSAT blog website, at the top, there's a books tab, and you click the books tab. It's the first book listed there, just LSAT day-by-day study plans for all periods of time, 1 month through 7 months. And I also have a retake schedules there as well.
Summing up some of what you said, it seems to me that the LSAT can be like almost like a Moby Dick phenomenon, right? It's sort of larger than life, but it sounds like what you've said is approach it with time, approach it systematically, take it piece by piece, and it's definitely something you can master.
Absolutely, 100%. You just want to break it down bit by bit, systematically, type by type, and move forward from there. And that way, later, when you see the exam as a whole, you'll actually know what you're looking at. It'll be a lot more understandable then.
I think we're super grateful. Steve, you've confirmed my sense that no meeting should be longer than an hour, because we've covered a lot of ground in less than an hour. So we're super grateful for your time and your energy and your expertise. And I'll make sure to pass on all your information and any links or emails, any links or electronic information you want to send to me, I will share with the group.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'll send some stuff over to you and look forward to hearing from you all. Please be in touch. Again, I'm happy to help however I can.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.